Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Emma Joyce, Head of Community at Global Digital Finance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Global Leaders Town Hall in partnership with the Global Blockchain Business Council with special guest Linda Lacewell, Superintendent of the New York State Department of Financial Services. Jeff Bandman, GDF board member, is hosting today's town hall. Jeff is widely recognized as a thought leader, speaker, and educator on blockchain and crypto asset law, regulation, and policy. He is co-founder and board member of Global Digital Finance and leads our regulatory engagement globally. Jeff was formerly a senior official at the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission, where he was responsible for design and launch of Lab CFTC, the CFTC's innovation hub and the first established by a US market regulator. Linda A. Lacewell is the third superintendent of the New York State Department of Financial Services. DFS supervises the activities of nearly 1,500 banking and other financial institutions with assets of more than 2.6 trillion and more than 1,800 insurance companies with assets of more than 4.7 trillion. A member of Governor Andrew M. Cuomo's cabinet, Superintendent Lacewell has dedicated her career to serving the public. Since taking office in 2019, Superintendent Lacewell has strengthened DFS's reputation as a national leader in consumer protection, appointing the department's first consumer advocate and consumer protection task force. Protected student loan borrowers, launching a Step Up for Students initiative, licensing student loan services, and introducing a student loan borrower bill of rights. She has supported innovation and strengthened cybersecurity in the financial services industry by creating research and innovation and cybersecurity divisions at the department. Championed financial inclusion and diversity, bringing bank branches into underdeserved areas of New York State, creating a committee to promote women leadership in financial services and hiring a diverse and talented leadership team. Fostered cooperation and collaboration with the department's international counterparts to safeguard the global financial system and is committed to fighting climate change. Contributed to New York's progressive achievements by helping codify the Affordable Care Act and Mental Health Parity and Addiction Act into New York state law. She has been a top advisor to the governor, a staunch advocate for economic justice, a tenacious prosecutor of wrongdoing, and a champion of women's rights and representation. We welcome and encourage your questions today. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it at any time using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I'd now like to welcome Jeff and Superintendent Lacewell.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emma. And Superintendent Lacewell, we're delighted to have you with us today. Very excited about today's conversation. As those of you who are tuned in know, New York, of course, is an important global center of capital markets and financial center, home to fintech and other innovations, a place I've personally called home as a native New Yorker. New York was one of the first places worldwide to introduce specific licensing and regulation for virtual currencies, the BIT license. It certainly attracted plenty of attention, and we'll be talking about that later today. New York has also weathered a lot of storms over the years, 9/11, the financial crisis, now COVID-19, where New York is at the epicenter of that. And Superintendent Lacewell has brought tremendous new energy to New York's DFS. She's brought in an enthusiastic and talented team with a proactive outreach, allocating resources and talent to innovation in the virtual currencies area, as well as her involvement in so many areas of New York's government. And so it's a really great pleasure to welcome you today, Superintendent Lacewell. It's great to have you today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to be here and honored to be here with you. Thank you, Emma, and to GDF for putting this together. These kinds of events are critically important, I believe, to engage in dialogue with industry and experts and academics and lawyers and all those interested in the spaces that we regulate, and that makes us better as a regulator, as informed by the rest of the stakeholders in the field. So I'm very excited to be here and to engage in that dialogue.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's been terrific as I've said the amount of kind of energy and outreach from your team that they've shown with regard to the conditional licensing framework and other matters. But maybe just to get started, I think many of our viewers are familiar with digital assets and are familiar with DFS's role in overseeing companies with the BIT license and the limited purpose trust companies. But DFS has such extremely broad responsibilities that go well beyond that. Could you tell us a bit about the scope of what DFS does and then your role as superintendent?
Yes, I'm glad to do so. Well, if you're in the crypto space, you know DFS. Some of you may curse DFS, but you know us. Outside of that space, there's a congressperson who has said DFS is the most powerful regulator that most people have never heard of. And that's because the panorama of areas that we supervise and regulate is incredibly broad. And why is that? Well, after the 2008 financial crisis, DFS was created, and it was the merger of banking as a regulator and insurance as a regulator. They were two separate agencies, and so they were merged together with a consumer division and with a new mandate to oversee not banking as banking and insurance as insurance, but financial services, which of course is very broad. Financial services that are sold or marketed typically to consumers or that require licensing in these various fields. So trillions of dollars in assets, the biggest insurance companies in the world, the state is the primary regulator of insurance in the United States. And so it is really the size of the institutions and of their assets that make the DFS footprint so large. But also licensed lenders, all kinds of fintech companies and payment vehicles, any kind of financial interaction with a consumer. And of course, that's incredibly broad. And when I came into office, I looked at this agency and I thought, how is the agency serving the public now? Where are the gaps? Where do we need to lean in? Where do we need to adjust? Because I believe government works for the people. It shouldn't be some stagnant enterprise. It's got to be reactive and responsive to what's happening on the ground and what the needs and what the vacuums are. So at the time, of course, and continuing, our national consumer regulator, the CFPB in Washington, really walked away from its enforcement responsibilities for consumers. So we created a new division on consumer protection and financial enforcement and took the other steps that Emma mentioned. But then also I felt the waves of change and innovation sweeping through our various industries, they have powerful currents. And it is imperative that we address those, not only externally, but internally for ourselves. Is DFS ready to be the regulator in a world of change and technology and innovation? How do we examine companies? How do we use data? How do we do data analytics? Can we be a risk-based regulator instead of like showing up every X period of time because that's what the schedule says? We have to adapt internally, and we are working on that. We expect a lot of industry. We've got to be able to do the same ourselves. But at the same time, as a banking regulator, we are well aware that fintech is burgeoning, and for a number of our smaller community banks is a threat. How can we mitigate that and foster partnerships between innovators and community banks and the like? And also, how do we stay current with an ability to see both the risks and the opportunities in technology and innovation? So that's why I created the Research and Innovation Division, which is at the same level as the banking division and the insurance division and the consumer division, headed by Matt Homer, who is an expert in the field and has assembled, as you mentioned, a great team. And then also cybersecurity, which is the biggest threat to government and industries everywhere in the world. So we created a new division for that as well and got an expert in there. And of course, we are the primary cyber regulator with our state-of-the-art best practice cyber regs. So it's critically important that we ourselves have a state-of-the-art division on that too. So it's a very comprehensive mission, and I believe in getting things done. So the first thing I had to do was assemble this phenomenal staff, which we were very lucky to attract, and empower them to move forward on this set of priorities. And so far, so good.
Yeah, that's great. And it's fascinating to hear and thinking about, how do you become the regulator of the future, equipping yourselves with the kind of tools and talent and to rise to the new challenges. And speaking of new challenges, I want to come back to, a number of the research and innovation initiatives that you talked about, but, goes without saying that COVID-19 has changed the world that we knew. The threat of the coronavirus, and New York has become a global epicenter of this pandemic. Can you shed some light on how New York has moved through this crisis, as well as your own role and experience as this crisis has unfolded and your mindset around it?
Yes, thank you. I think it continues to be an issue on everybody's mind, no matter what you do for a living. I am a member of the governor's cabinet, as you mentioned. I also worked for him for a long time directly in his role as governor and previously in his role as the state attorney general, one of his closest advisors. So when the pandemic hit New York and we got the first case, I actually was in London. For those of you who are in London, I was there. Love that city. I actually grew up in the Midlands in England when I was a child. So I was in London and scheduled to meet with the incoming Bank of England chair, Andrew Bailey. And I was there for about 24 hours. It was March 1st or 2nd when I got there, I walked around, I went to the dinner for the event. I came back, my phones were totally blowing up. And I was being directed to get on the next plane and come back to New York and get up to Albany to help the team on this crisis. And as I have said, Heathrow, there were no planes. It was Gatwick, overnight, 3 o'clock in the morning, landed at JFK, got in a car, went up to Albany, and stayed there for like 3 or 4 months with very rare exceptions. So I was there embedded, as they say, at the state capitol in Albany with the governor's core team. And we could fill many hours obviously on this, but it was a very intense time, but we were all calmed and motivated and inspired by the governor's incredible leadership, which everyone else got to see in his daily briefings every day, which the networks and cable TV, I guess, carried. And the man for the moment, there's no question about it, crisis manager extraordinaire, and just helped New Yorkers to do what they needed to do. So we went up this horrible mountain of cases and deaths, not knowing where it was going to end. And thanks to the actions of the people of the state who stayed home, who socially distanced, and all the other things that you need to do, wearing a mask, washing your hands, etc. Finally, we peaked and then started the much, much, much slower coming down the mountain, where we are now almost where we started in terms of the numbers. And the challenge, of course, is that other states are now starting to experience that crisis where their hospital system is stretched and the cases are spiking and the deaths are starting to go up. No place, Manhattan may be an island, but no place is really an island, right? I mean, New York State, so much travel. People go down to Georgia, they come back infected. They go to Florida, they come back infected. It's the interconnectedness that we have is not fully appreciated. And we are interconnected on health, on the economic impacts. We are interconnected on everything we do. In my role, we are interconnected. The regulators in Europe, England, France, Germany, they regulate some of the same institutions that we do. So we can't sort of be off in our little silos. And we've got to understand that the cords that connect all of us are not going away, and they can't be severed. And if they were to be severed at all, it would damage all of us. And of course, we wish that certain leaders would understand that being in another country is not what is important. It is our human connection, and that then everything follows from that. The health connection, the economic connection, the jobs connection, the innovation connection. You know, when some of us rise, we can lift others up, and that's where our attention needs to be.
And what was like during the period, some of those intense periods after you've come back to from London to Albany, not expecting there, you find yourself there with this crisis going on. What's a typical day like for you during this, if there even is such a thing?
Well, of course, there was a narrative that we as the core team followed to support the governor. In the beginning, nobody really knew what we were dealing with. How much of a problem was it going to be in New York? Where was it going to be a problem? How do you identify it? There was no testing, zero. The states weren't even allowed to test. The CDC controlled the testing, and they did a bad job of it. And they ultimately, under a lot of pressure, particularly from our governor, said okay to the states. But then we had to generate the testing capacity. We had to get the big commercial labs online, the hospital labs online to generate capacity for testing. And, you know, there's going from 0 to 100 in a very short period of time, because if you can't, you know, it's not, if we didn't test so many people, we wouldn't have such a problem. It's that you can't identify the problem unless you're doing the testing. So, because then you can isolate and quarantine and you can control the spread. And it took a long time to get that capacity. So understanding that, and then understanding where was it likely to go? What were we facing? Was our hospital capacity going to be large enough to handle this problem? And the answer is no. So then how do you stretch that capacity? And then the numbers, tracking the numbers. The data was critically important. How many people tested positive yesterday, and where were they, and where is it burgeoning? And then, unfortunately, we started, obviously, like every other location, to have deaths and where the deaths occurring. And you have to track these numbers all the way up while trying to take the mitigation measures and encourage the people to take, what do you shut down? Where do you shut down? How do you do it? How do you get people to do it when nobody's ever been through this before? If you said to anybody in January or like in August of last year, nobody would have predicted this, unless you were in the federal government in that particular space. But you had to identify, track, mitigate, address, reduce what was happening on the ground. And so that's what various teams of us did every day. And of course, the PowerPoint that the governor put out every day is what communicated to the people, here's what's happening, here's what we think is going to happen, here's what we need you to do and why. And that kind of ran the day to day, because we needed to be able to communicate with the people about what was happening to them and where we were likely going. So it was extremely intense. We were there, you know, every day, long hours, no sleep, you know, 122 days or something like that. But, you know, whenever any of us felt like this is getting to be a little bit too much, all you had to do was think about the nurses and the doctors in the emergency rooms and in the ICUs, and about the families who are losing people. It was a privilege to be able to do anything to be helpful in that regard. And our governor, you know, I strongly believe has set the model for the nation of what you can do when you deal based on the facts and the science, and you talk to your people and you bring them with you so that it is a partnership. Because unless the people did what they did, we are not in the place now that we are, where the numbers are extremely low, and we are trying to keep it that way with the people's help.
Tremendous public service. Really, you know, it's certainly meant a lot as a New Yorker to see the level of energy and communication, you know, through a very confusing time, and somehow with all of this going on, you know, you've found the time to build up the team that was focused on research and innovation, and to launch a series of new programs built around harnessing technology to expand opportunities. You've launched DFS Fast Forward and some other programs around it. Can you tell us about about this Fast Forward program, you know, where it came from and what it's about, and how the response has been so far?
Sure. So When I hired Matt Homer, why did I hire Matt? Well, he had experience in the private sector and the public sector. I had experience with financial innovation to help, third world nations, been in Africa, UNDCP. So, but even more than that, he had ideas. He had ideas for what we could do. And he knew how to do it, and he was going to get it done. And that's what's important to me. Government, as the governor likes to say, it's not a debating society. We could have all the conversations in the world about innovation, and if we do nothing, then who cares? So he had a plan. He wanted to hire a team of people. I gave him permission to do so. He recruited them, got the band together, so to speak, the new band, not the old band. We didn't have an old band. And then he started with these priorities to move them forward. So, Project Whitehall, which was a InsurTech initiative, was his idea. There's a lot of fintech. Insurance is where we dominate. Why not start with insurance as a tech initiative? And he had a number of early stage insurance entrepreneurs coming in and speaking with him, and it was successful and the model worked. So he then came to me with Fast Forward, because what he was doing is what I said is really important, which is you take what you're doing and you look at it and you say, how does this meet the moment? What do people need? So Fast Forward is a way for innovators to bring us their ideas in a few different areas that are critically important now. One is health, think telehealth. I mean, the reason that we need that, obviously, at this point needs no explanation. But by the way, many people think this pandemic is not going to be the last time that globally we have to deal with situations where you're going to have to be remote. And so, look, technology is taking us there anyway. And since we have a health imperative for it, let's maximize and put our energies into helping entrepreneurs who want to bring ideas into that space and want the internal regulatory perspective of what their hurdles and obstacles and opportunities are going to be. And then another area is small business, right? We've had the economy wrecked, frankly, by the health pandemic across the board because everybody had to stay home and small businesses couldn't have customers inside and they couldn't probably even go to work for long periods of time. So how do we help small businesses, which are the backbone of the economy in New York and elsewhere, to restart, to generate jobs, generate income, which is for the good of all? How can innovators help us to do that? We want your ideas. So come forward with your ideas on that. And then finally, households or families and their financial resilience. How can families, individuals and families move forward in this distanced economy, right? There are plenty of horror stories out there where some people, they wanted to go to the bank and get the money out of the bank, and where's the ATM and how many ATMs are there? The banks are closed, how can they get their money? How can the federal government get financial benefits to people without this whole, well, did you file a tax return and when did you file it and is that the bank account? I mean, those in the payment stream world know what I'm talking about. And the same thing with our uninsurance benefits, unemployment benefits, excuse me, getting those to people in a world where we've got stodgy old government bureaucracy that might as well be from, the 1950s practically. We need innovative technology reform across the board, again, within government, outside of government, and for people. And what I would say is, if you are innovating, this is your time. This is your opportunity. And what are you going to do with this opportunity, right? Are you going to make some sort of, theoretical, helpful to 11.5 people idea who are already super wealthy? Or are you going to meet the moment? Are you going to look at what people need? Are you going to be of service in your way? You don't have to be in government to be of service. What are you doing about the economy, about small business, about health? What are you doing about financial inclusion, which is something we can talk more about? Innovators, what I heard when I came in is everybody has all these ideas, these technology ideas, and the regulators are standing in their way. The regulators are highly motivated to expedite and bend and be flexible to help you to get to market. It's now on you. It's now on you to step up and do something non-ethereal, something real and practical that can help real people with real problems in real time.
Yeah. That's a great great perspective. You know, really, it's a challenge, but an opportunity to meet the moment and come up with something kind of concrete. And then, you know, the regulator has an environment, has kind of the tools and the kind of talent and mindset to, you know, to work with people who are trying to accomplish that. Yeah.
Yes, and you put that very well. Since we've announced some of our initiatives, some people have said to me, well, what is this going to look like? What are the business models going to be? What are the ideas going to be? And I don't know. That's the job of your audience and others.
Yeah.
The way I look at it, we're trying to generate conditions on the ground that allow innovators to operate, germinate, test their ideas, rather than sort of a top-down, these are the kinds of particular things that we want. Because that's what innovation is all about. As a regulator, it's actually in the charter of DFS to foster economic development. So even if we didn't have an innovation agenda, it's part of our job to generate economic development, which in this environment has got to be largely through technology and innovation, whether it's fintech, insurtech, or other kinds of tech. New ideas to deal with an utterly changed world of health and finance and personal operation. So that's what we're trying to do. We engage in the dialogue with the industry and with the thought leaders. What are the problems? What are the complaints? What are you not getting? How can we make it better? While being responsible as regulators, because we still have to protect consumers and we still have to guard against money laundering and terrorism, and you know, sanctions violations under OFAC. We've still got to make sure we guard against fraud. We got to make sure your money, your assets don't get stolen while you're trying to operate, so that you've got all the right procedures in place. But where can we open things up more for the innovators and entrepreneurs who want to get in the space?
Yeah, it's interesting that you talked about kind of going back and looking at your, you know, charter and what that said in terms of fostering economic development. And, you know, at the CFTC, when we were thinking about setting up an innovation program, you know, we also went back and looked at our charter and our statute, which talked about promoting responsible innovation. And, you know, other regulators around the world, that you mentioned the UK earlier and the FCA, you know, their charter actually, as we understood it, didn't talk about innovation per se, but talked about competition. They had competition authority. So you just, you know, you look to the authorities and the tools and the mandate that you have. And in the case of DFS, it's certainly a very, very broad one in this area.
Yes, that's right. It sort of can bend a bit to the times, and that's useful. And I think the dialogue is really critically important. Look, one of the complaints I heard when I took over DFS was that DFS was a sort of a closed book. And they didn't want to talk to anybody. They didn't want to hear from anybody. They wanted to sort of be a top-down regulator. And we heard those complaints across the board, including from our legislature and all the various stakeholders. And look, maybe when DFS first started as sort of a baby, you know, regulator, I could sort of see, get yourself stood up. But it was more than time for DFS to open up to discussion. Because if you don't hear the complaints or the ideas, you're not going to be able to do the job as fully as you could. You need to know what's working and what's not working, and you need to be able to explain to people what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve, and you can get a lot more done together. We can get more done with the legislature. We can get more done with the industry. And DFS, as we discussed at the top of this event, is such an incredibly broad and powerful regulator. We need to leverage out with partnerships. I mean, and partnerships means with other regulators. We have very strong relationships with the other federal financial regulators. We have good relationships within the state banking organization, CSBS, within the Insurance Association for Regulators, the NAIC, and given our global reach, right? Many foreign banks choose to be based in New York and regulated by DFS in the United States. So that just further stretches our impact. And that's why I went to Europe a year ago and met with the regulators in London and France and Germany. That's why we've entered into a number of these global agreements. We joined GFIN, the Global Financial Regulator for Innovation Coalition, and we joined climate change coalitions. We've joined into MOUs with foreign regulators on a whole host of issues, because I believe that we are more effective when we work together on common aims. It makes us all stronger. You're better at one thing than me, I'm better at one thing than you. You have a good idea, I have a good idea, we both have complaints about everything. So, and in Europe, I found the same priorities are there. Innovation, consumer protection, jobs, the economy, climate change, everyone is dealing with the same thing. To sort of sit back in our offices and not talk to anybody would not have served us well at this stage of our existence.
Yeah.
So I want people to know that we are open to discussion. Matt Homer will give out his phone number. I'm only half joking, but there is a place on our website where you can put forward your comments and complaints, and I'll get that for you by the end of this event.
That's great. That's wonderful. Boy, well, there's so much to follow up on in what you just said. The MOUs with foreign regulators, which certainly since I've been monitoring the fintech space, it's the first that I've seen. And you've entered into MOUs with the ACPR in France. You've entered into one with the Israeli regulator. You already spoke about how much common ground there is. What are you hoping to accomplish through some of these MOUs?
Well, part of it is, as a supervisor of financial institutions, it's important that we share information with each other so that our supervision, for example, on foreign banks is coordinated and we both have the same information. In the innovation space, innovation by its very nature, right, it's new. So what are the experiences and what are the approaches of the regulators in Europe? How do the French do it? How do the British do it, right? And speaking in a private setting with those regulators about how they think about innovation, how they dialogue with innovators, right? One of the European regulators told me that initially he spoke with his licensed institutions, and then he said, I want you to introduce me to some of your fintech partners, because I want to talk to them and I want to hear their experiences and understand the road they're going, and how ultimately, as regulators, we can leverage out their ideas or make their path easier in a responsible way. So learning how they do it, since as regulators, we're a little bit of a step behind. And on something like climate change, really critically important, because the Europeans, the French and the British are far, far ahead of the United States when it comes to climate change, A, across the board, and B, in terms of dealing with regulated institutions. And we can talk about this more, but we have to have humility in what we do. If you are confident in what you do, you can have the humility also. We know what we know, and we understand there are many things we don't know. If others have done it, let's talk to them. Let's find out. Let's get their template. And they appreciate it too, by the way. They like hearing what the United States is doing. They like hearing what New York is doing. And to many of them, by the way, New York is the United States. right? You see it in the foreign affairs space, right? If the Prime Minister of Israel comes to the United States, he's meeting with the New York governor, and as though he is a head of state. So you find that sort of across the board. The Israeli financial regulators like to come and meet with us and hear what we're doing. There's such a strong relationship between Israel and New York, including in the tech space. Obviously, Israel is a real tech leader and a leader in many other respects as well. We obviously have historic ties with the UK, strong relationships with France and Germany and other European countries. And I think that sort of historic relationship is built into the regulatory space and is an advantage. We even have within DFS something called the Holocaust Asset Recovery Office, where we help claimants at no cost to identify and recover works of art, insurance policies, bank accounts, be what it may, from the Holocaust era. And when we went to Europe, we met with other entities, either private or who have relationships with the financial regulators there who are doing the same work. And just sitting down and talking together about the work and how you get it done and what the obstacles are and how do we make it better, how can we help each other, was incredibly rewarding. Same thing with the consumer groups. So it's an opportunity and it is very helpful and impactful.
With another example also of just the scope of responsibilities that you have within DFS. You spoke earlier about the interaction with kind of health insurance and telemedicine because of your oversight of the insurance industry, the ability to help Holocaust victims. This is the remit compared to a typical financial regulator is so broad. There's so many opportunities, so many different types of constituencies to help or that you impact.
Yes, it is a tremendous opportunity, and I'm very grateful for the governor's trust in nominating me and the Senate approving me to this position.
Sure. So certainly no conversation for folks in the digital asset space with DFS would be complete without discussing the BIT license, which we alluded to a bit earlier. And we recently celebrated or commemorated, whatever the correct verb is, for the 5th birthday or anniversary of the BIT license. What was your approach? How have you approached the BIT license since becoming superintendent and thinking about perhaps how it might need to be updated? And then what are some of the major aspects of the recent announcement and what you're doing with the BIT license going forward?
Yes, thank you. So when I first came in, I noticed that there was a backlog with respect to review of applications for the BIT license. And that was concerning to me because I know that you can't operate with respect to New York consumers or businesses in the business of cryptocurrency without a license from us. And I made it a priority, and we reassigned personnel to start to work through the backlog. And I think we've done numerous application decisions since then. But then beyond that, the area felt a little stale. And I thought to myself, we're coming up on 5 years of having this license, and we need to take a fresh look. So I think I said this at the end of last year, that we need to take a fresh look. I was very conscious of the criticisms about the license and that it wasn't pragmatic and that it favored a select few and that you had to have a lot of money to get into the space. And I wanted to look at that and see, was it true? How much of it was true? And what could we do about it? How had the industry matured in the prior 5 years? And what were the new business models? And where were we leaning in too much or not enough? So, look, what we found was the department had not really put out any guidance to speak of, and it's a complicated application. So we knew that at a bare minimum, we needed to clarify and explain the regulatory regime and the licensing application. But beyond that, we engaged and we had the hard conversations, and we talked to those who were regulated and those who wanted to be regulated, and their lawyers and their experts and the folks in universities and other academia. And we said, tell us in a confidential setting, what's working, what's not working, and what your fixes are, because don't just complain. How would you fix it? And everyone really stepped up, which we really appreciate. And I personally sat down with a number of people as well. Matt and his team took the laboring oar, and then they came back and they said, this is what we're hearing. It's too hard to get in, it's too expensive. You don't tell us what it all means. You don't talk to us. You don't understand us. And where you feel kind of hopeless about it. So we took it to heart, and we have taken a number of steps. One of the things I really wanted to do, beyond explaining what we were trying to do so that folks could get it right, is I wanted to open it up. Innovation is supposed to be about newness of change. So yeah, the Fidelities of the world and Gemini and Paxos, you know, can come in and do it. But how do we open it up in a way that's responsible? So we ended up with a number of ideas, which I'm very excited about. One is SUNY, which is the State University System in New York. They have 64 campuses across the state, primarily outside of New York City, which tends to be very well served. We're doing a partnership with them. We signed an MOU. We're calling it SUNY Block. And SUNY is going to create a vehicle that can be licensed by us on the BIT license, and then partner with innovators, entrepreneurs, cryptocurrency outfits attached to a campus around the state. And we have something in our existing license regulation called a conditional license, which has never been used, never been activated. So we're activating that. And if you want to partner with a SUNY campus and get a conditional license, go talk to SUNY. And beyond that, the conditional license, again, the ideas are endless and they are yours. If you want to do a small test of something, you want to go through the whole giant licensing exercise, maybe you get a conditional license. If you want to partner with an existing licensee and share the risks and responsibilities and rewards, maybe they run the money laundering, anti-money laundering systems, they do the transaction monitoring, you do some other things, come to us with a proposal. What we are saying is the conditional license is open for business. You see how you might fit in and you tell us, because we are flexible. We have put that out for comment. And you can go to dfs.ny.gov/VC to put your comments in there. And then we also initially put out for comment and have now finalized some new ideas on how to deal with new coins in the crypto space. So what we're trying to do here is manage the risks. So if 3 licensed cryptocurrency businesses have all gotten approval and are using a new coin in the marketplace, whether by self-certifying, which we're now allowing under a procedure where you've got a policy and a memorandum that we've approved that is the template for moving forward to self-certify, or if 3 licensed companies have obtained approval to list a particular coin or to have it in trust, then that coin gets what we call green listed. It'll be up on our website and any licensee can use it, can list it or take it into trust. So, or if DFS has been involved in the setting up of a particular coin as the regulator, which means we've really stress tested it and vetted it, then any licensee can use it. So this is all further explained there, and I don't want to get into too much technical detail, but think self-certifying or industry use. And it's really an example of how your input can help. Because originally we just said, we're going to give you a list of coins that either you can self-certify or that you can just use. And the industry said, well, I don't mind the self-certifying because, you know, I can do that, but why are you picking? Why are you, the regulator, picking the coins that we can use? So we flipped it, we turned it on its head and we said, fine, industry, if you come to us 3 times, now it's on the green list. So it's driven by you and your practices and what you see out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, well, that's great. And, you know, at the CFTC, self-certification has been, a very important part of the regulatory framework, and really supports responsible innovation. And self-certification isn't just a matter of checking a few boxes. I mean, people have to really make sure it meets the criteria, and their defined criteria, which are quite important. But that sort of framework, in a way, you're kind of crowdsourcing the innovation, and you're also kind of putting the burden on the innovators to meet the moment, as you kind of put it before.
Well said.
Yeah. And what has been the reaction that you've seen since you've released these new aspects of the BIT license?
So the reaction has been very positive, and I'm not surprised by that, because we didn't do it by ourselves. We did it by talking with those who understand the industry and what the needs are. And so the reaction has been very positive, and beyond positive, we've even had some licensees tell us that they're very excited and interested in pursuing conditional licensing with other potential parties or partners in the space. So I'm excited about that, because I want the industry to grow. Look, when it first started, people said fly by night, crazy idea, fraud, worse, right? But there are responsible actors in the marketplace. Any financial service or product can be abused, misused, and turned into a bad instrument. So we want innovators across the board to come to New York, to locate here, to grow. We are the capital of finance. We are the capital of innovation. We need to do both. And we want innovators right here in New York, which has been the birthplace of so much invention and ingenuity historically, and has always set the standard, not just for the rest of the country, but for the world. That's what it means to be the birthplace of immigration, because change agents come here, and we want you here.
That's great. And at GDF and GVBC, there's a kind of a global audience. So hope everybody's listening to that. New York is open. So we do have we are now open to questions from the audience, and the first question we have here: how the Superintendent, how have the events following the death of George Floyd and the global protest affected DFS's focus on economic justice?
So I'm very glad for that question. So obviously, the murder of Mr. Floyd, which was the last in a long line of horrific events involving Black people, people of color, Black men in particular, and law enforcement, where they are treated differently. And it sparked an outcry and an outrage for that treatment, and treatment across the board in all industries, and the whole horrible history of race relations in this country, beginning with the original sin of slavery. And these issues are not easy to talk about. But at a baseline level, what I have found is it's very important to talk about it, including with our staff, because everyone is hurting from this, everyone. It's not acceptable. I believe government has a role to play across the board. Even before this understandable unrest by protesters and others speaking out, DFS has been focused on financial inclusion. We proposed and will be standing up a statewide office of financial inclusion and empowerment. I have recruited a very diverse staff. I have spoken out publicly about the importance of women and minorities in financial services and in innovation, by the way, pointing out in one of my pre-pandemic speaking events that if you want to innovate, be diverse, because studies show that diversity engenders creativity and innovation across the board. If you're sitting around a table and everybody looks just like you and has the same experience, you're going to get one idea, because everybody had the same experience. Studies show in boardrooms and in executive suites and in innovation spaces. Diversity is not just something that you should want, it's something that you need. And so my call to industry is to recognize that, to champion it, Chris Brummer, who many of you know, has been speaking out about this recently, saying in financial services, in financial service regulators, and in innovation vehicles, where is the diversity? Where is the sharing with the diverse elements of our system? Come up with the ideas that will help everyone, including the most disempowered and disenfranchised, and ultimately and understandably disaffected. We have got to do more, all of us, and everybody has a role. It's not just, oh, it's law enforcement or it's the regulators, it's everybody. What are we doing about it? We need to harness the energy of these protests and bring them to bear to have an effect and an impact where we actually help lift others. If we are all connected, as I said at the beginning, if when we rise, others rise, how are we making that happen? How is your board or your executive suite including diverse individuals, and where are your ideas to help all of humankind and not just the wealthy who would like another app on their phone? I'm deadly serious about this, and we will help you as much as humanly possible. If you come to us with ideas in that space, you're going to go to the top of the line.
That's wonderful to hear. That's great. That's great to hear. You've spoken a number of points in our conversation about the role of government and public service. For me personally, public service and a financial regulator has been a career highlight. What made you choose public service, and what advice would you give to people who are considering a future career or a next step in public service?
So thanks for that question, very important. For me, I was the first person in my family to go to college. My mother came from an immigrant family, so it wasn't a clear path for me back then. But I knew that I wanted to be involved in justice in some way. So I went to law school, became a defense attorney, then a prosecutor, and then I was lucky enough to work for the governor when he was the AG. And I started to see what you could do systemically to bring about systemic justice. And that became very critically important to me, and that has really led me on the path that I'm on and with the priorities that I do have. So I think now, with the triple crises of public health, the social unrest, and the economy, we are now seeing more than ever how critically important government is, because government, our first job is to protect people. And we've got to generate also opportunity for people. We've got to protect them in the health space. We've got to bring them racial justice, criminal justice, and we've got to generate economic opportunity. And that is quite a handful, and government needs your help. So if you have any interest, pursue it, because we are one society. As Mario Cuomo said, we are one family of New York. And now is the time for government to step up. Take a time out, take a year off, go work for government or some public interest, because this is a globally interconnected world on health, on climate change, on the economy, on opportunity, on justice of all kinds for people of all kinds. And it takes all of us to improve the lot of all peoples in that regard. And you will never do anything more rewarding in your entire life than to help other people. Thank you so much.
And that's great. Well, I think we have time for one last question before we wrap up. Although that, hope people will really take those messages to heart. The last question for you, Superintendent, is how does DFS seek to balance the potential positive impact of emerging technologies like virtual currencies with the risks such as money laundering or vulnerable consumers?
So great question. We do always have to do the balance. So we require all of our licensed entity, including FinTech, InsurTech, and the like, to have systems in place to manage the risk of money laundering, including transaction monitoring, anti-sanction systems, consumer protection, anti-fraud. There's a whole set. And so I believe that we need to be continually evaluating, do just as much regulation as you need, and not a drop more. And in the crypto space, this has worked because our licensees actually use the fact of the license in their marketing materials to say to their counterparties, investors, shareholders, business partners, customers, we have the DFS license, and what they're saying is you can trust us because we have been duly vetted. So I think this can work, and it also protects you against other people using your enterprise to commit crimes or to launder money. And it protects you, hopefully, against theft of your assets and your products and your investments and your ideas.
Yeah. That's great, and you've seen some of that that advertising on taxis and train stations, and really, Union Station right next to the SEC. It's very pervasive. Well, look, we're out of time, and unfortunately, I see a lot of additional great questions coming in, but we are out of time. But Superintendent Lacewell, so we'd like to thank you so much for joining us for a terrific Global Leaders Town Hall. We'd like to thank our audience. For those of you, next week we'll have a conversation between the COO of GBBC, Marcina Tillman, and special guest Eva Cali, who's a member of the European Parliament on blockchain innovation and regulations in the European Union. We're also having a virtual summit tomorrow on the travel rule, speaking of anti-money laundering, and the sessions from last week's conference on global stablecoins and digital currencies should be up on our website tomorrow. Again, Superintendent, thank you very much. Any last words before we wrap up for our audience?
No, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening, and keep doing what you're doing because you're a very important part of the recovery that we all need and to be continued. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.